They want a justice of the United States of the Supreme Court to step down from historic cases or the consideration of historic cases because some flags were flown at this home. The left is very nervous about the Supreme Court issuing more rulings that might benefit Trump or vindicate the rule of law in other ways they object to. And so, once again, in preparation for undermining the Supreme Court's decisions that they are unlikely to support, they've been attacking the justices and attacking the Supreme Court because ultimately they want to destroy the Supreme Court, at least destroy the Supreme Court and change it into something that is anti-constitutional and would undermine the constitutional structure of our government. And they've been harassing Justice Alito and his wife, Martha, is it Martha Ann, I think, over flags, demanding that Chief Justice Roberts go meet with left-wing extremist senators, Durbin and Whitehouse, who, by the way, Judicial Watch filed an ethics complaint against because of his involvement in votes on things, on projects, and him pushing monies for projects that obviously, quite obviously, benefited his wife's companies and groups his wife was associated with. And he's lecturing Justice Alito on ethics. And so, of course, the media is very sympathetic, right? They hate Justice Alito. They hate Justice Thomas. They especially hate Justice Thomas because he's black. They've been attacking him and my friend Ginny Thomas, his wife. But Justice Alito, to my great excitement, wrote back a scathing but polite and professional letter to his abusers, Durham and Sheldon Whitehouse. And I want to go through the letter with you because it's important. You know, you just hear recusal, recusal, recusal for these conservative justices, and you rarely hear what the reality is as it relates to recusals at the Supreme Court. And Justice Alito ably goes through this in the letter. So this is very educational, and I think it's worth taking the time. This letter he wrote on May 28th. This is a response to your letter of May 23rd to the Chief Justice requesting that he take steps to ensure that I recuse in Trump versus the United States and any other cases related to the 2020 presidential election or the January 6th attack on the Capitol. As the court has pointed out, individual justices, rather than the court, decide recusal issues. And that's been the case for 235 years, by the way. I'm therefore responding directly to your letter. In it, you claim that the two incidents involving the flying of flags creating an appearance of impropriety that requires my recusal. The applicable provision of our code of conduct states as follows. And by the way, a code of conduct that they follow voluntarily, since the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court of the land. A justice is presumed impartial and has an obligation to sit unless disqualified. Think about that. Unless there's like evidence that's substantial, all judges are presumed to be impartial and ethical. You know, because the system couldn't work otherwise, right? So, for instance, with Judge Merchan, just because he's likely a Democrat, it doesn't mean he's incapable of sitting on a case. The question about recusal for Judge Merchan arose because the standards for recusal were met because of his daughter's financial interest in the outcome of the proceeding and the demonstrated seeming bias he had in making illicit, unethical campaign contributions to Joe Biden in a race against Trump. A justice should disqualify himself or herself in a proceeding in which the justice's impartiality might reasonably be questioned. And this is not any Joe Schmo on the street saying, I don't like Justice Alito because he was appointed by a Republican, and therefore anything that he says or does in his private capacity, it should generate his recusal because it shows he's a Republican. And that's no more sophisticated than what the Democrats and the left are saying now. But the reasonable person standard isn't what you might think it is. And here is what the rule says. That is, where an unbiased, and reasonable person who is aware of all relevant circumstances would doubt that the justice could fairly discharge his or her duties. So, and that's the standard. It can't be, a poll. It's got to be a careful analysis of issues that may reflect on the need for recusal. And that's not what's happening here, quite obviously. The two incidents you cite do not meet the conditions for recusal set out in B2, which is that recusal standard I just read to you, and I therefore have an obligation to sit. The presumption is that justices have to sit. We don't want justices recusing themselves willy-nilly because there's no sub. It's not like a lower court where for a federal district court judge, of which there are, I think, hundreds, and certainly in each district there are multiple federal court judges, the case can, another judge can come in if a judge has to recuse himself. But that's not the case in the Supreme Court. It could lead to 4-4 decisions, which would distort the case. It may lead to no decisions, which could distort the rule of law as well. The first incident cited in your letter concerns the flying of an upside-down American flag outside the house in Virginia where my wife and I reside. In considering whether this event required recusal, an unbiased and reasonable person would take into account the following facts. As I stated publicly, I had nothing whatsoever to do with the flying of the flag. I was not even aware of the upside-down flag until it was called to my attention. As soon as I saw it, I asked my wife to take it down, but for several days she refused. Well, I think it's just great that Justice Alito has a normal marriage where spouses disagree about what to do. And there's the upside-down flag. The leftist lunatics in the media and anti-Supreme Court, those trying to undermine the Supreme Court were taking pictures outside of her home. My wife and I own our Virginia home jointly. She therefore has the legal right to use the property as she sees fit, and there were no additional steps that I could have taken to have the flag taken down more promptly. So he was trying to explain legally he couldn't do anything about it, which is kind of funny. But it's still outrageous he has to go through this, and I'm sure it's embarrassing for the judge and his wife. And to be clear, even if Justice Alito had flown the upside-down flag, there'd be no basis to ask for his recusal. No basis whatsoever. And he's explaining he wasn't involved necessarily. My wife's reasons for flying the flag are not relevant for present purposes. So he doesn't have to justify it. But I note that she was greatly distressed at the time, due in large part to a very nasty neighborhood dispute in which I had no involvement. A house on the street displayed a sign attacking her personally, and a man who was living in the house at the time trailed her all the way down the street and berated her in my presence using foul language, including what I regard as the vilest epithet that could be addressed to a woman. Wow. So it sounds like they're in a kind of a dangerous situation there with their leftist crazed neighbors. My wife is a private citizen and she possesses the same First Amendment rights as every other American. She makes her own decisions and I have always respected her right to do so. She's made many sacrifices to accommodate my service on the Supreme Court, including the insult of having to endure numerous loud, obscene, and personally insulting protests in front of our home that continue to this day and now threaten to escalate. Well, you know, that's a moving paragraph there. You know, any of us involved in public life, you know, we kind of suffer the slings and arrows. But our families and our spouses, you know, they suffer too. They suffer too. And Mrs. Alito is suffering because her husband, you know, accepted the call to service and is honorably serving the United States as a Supreme Court Justice of the United States. These leftists are so evil, aren't they? That this has come to this. I mean, their lives are under threat. That's how I read this. I'm confident that a reasonable person, and this is my favorite part of the letter, because it's written to two nasty senators, who is not motivated by political or ideological considerations or desire to affect the outcome of Supreme Court cases, will conclude that the events recounted above do not meet the applicable standard for recusal. I am therefore required to reject your request. The second incident, there's more. I am confident, let me see. The second incident concerns a flag bearing the legend, "An Appeal to Heaven," that flew in the backyard of our vacation home in the summer of 2023. I recall that my wife did fly that flag for some period of time, but I do not remember how long it flew, what it was, and what is most relevant here, I had no involvement in the decision to fly that flag. My wife is fond of flying flags. I am not. My wife was solely responsible for having flagpoles put up at our residence and our vacation home, and has flown a wide variety of flags over the years. God bless Mrs. Alito. She sounds like a patriot. In addition to the American flag, she has flown other patriotic flags, including a favorite flag thanking veterans, college flags, flags supporting sport teams, state and local flags, flags of nations from which the ancestors of family members came, flags of places we have visited, seasonal flags, and religious flags. I was not familiar with the Appeal to Heaven flag when my wife flew it. She may have mentioned that it dates back to the American Revolution. I assumed she was flying it to express a religious and patriotic message. I was not aware of any connection between this historic flag and the Stop the Steal movement, and neither was my wife. She didn't fly the flag to associate herself with that or any other group, and the use of an old historic flag by a new group does not necessarily drain that flag of all meanings. As I said in reference to the other flag event, my wife is an independently minded private citizen. She makes her own decisions, and I honor her right to do so. Our vacation home was purchased with money she inherited from her parents and is titled in her name. It is a place away from Washington where she should be able to relax. Again, a reasonable person who is not motivated by political or ideological considerations or a desire to affect the outcome of Supreme Court cases will conclude that this event does not meet the applicable standard for recusal. And the mirror of that is those senators are unreasonable, they're motivated by political and ideological considerations, and they want to affect the outcome of Supreme Court cases. And he concludes once again, there's the flag. Again, they went to their home and took pictures, or these pictures previously were taken and they were then published by the nasty media. Nasty is my word of the day. The left is just plain nasty these days. So I thought that was important to share. I thought that letter was pretty darn interesting. I'm glad I took the time to read it. And Chief Justice Roberts isn't playing any games either, because the goon senators trying to intimidate the Supreme Court were demanding that Roberts come in and meet with him about this fake scandal that they've concocted. I mean, listen, let me be clear. They want a justice of the United States of the Supreme Court to step down from historic cases or the consideration of historic cases because some flags were flown at this home. I mean, that's an argument only Judge Merchant and that jury up in New York would buy. So Chief Justice Roberts wrote as well. In regard to questions concerning any justice's participation in pending cases, the members of the Supreme Court recently reaffirmed the practice we have followed for 235 years, pursuant to which individual justices decide recusal issues. And then he cites the code. Go, Chief Justice Roberts. You won't hear me say that too much, right? He's generally a conservative justice. I don't agree with all of his decisions, obviously. But this is to those senators, isn't it? By the way, we've been doing this for 235 years. Step back. That's what Chief Justice Roberts is saying. It is my understanding that Justice Alito has sent you a letter addressing the subject. I must respectfully decline your request for a meeting. As noted in my letter to Chairman Durbin last April, apart from ceremonial events, so this is not the first time they've harassed him. Only on rare occasions in our nation's history has a sitting Chief Justice met with legislators, even in a public setting, such as a committee hearing, with members of both major political parties present. Separation of powers, that's the Constitution, concerns, and the importance of preserving judicial independence counsel against such appearances. Moreover, the format proposed, a meeting with leaders only of one party, who has expressed an interest in matters currently pending before the court, simply underscore that participating in such a meeting would be inadvisable. Not a terribly warm letter. It was a letter telling them to go jump in a lake. I'm not going to participate in your scheme to undermine and try to rig the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, I'm happy with these letters, but let's not underestimate that this pressure campaign sometimes does work. I'm convinced there are justices on the Supreme Court who kind of burnish some of the tough edges of their decisions, maybe moderate them, not make them as strong, as aggressive they should be. I mean, if you've got people outside your home screaming at you in violation of the law, and the Department of Justice under Joe Biden refuses to enforce the law that would protect you and your family's lives from that illegal intimidation, would take a strong man or woman to not cave into that pressure from time to time. Or maybe think in the back of their mind, well, maybe I won't go here. I won't go as far as I otherwise would. Maybe that will call the dogs. Maybe the dogs will be less likely to bark at me or bite me. So the rule of law is not only under attack in New York City, it's under attack here in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to issue praise where praise is due, and I will praise Justice Alito and Chief Justice Roberts for publicly and forcefully standing up and pushing back against this left-wing partisan attempt to ruin and undermine the Supreme Court of the United States and destroy our Constitution. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.